All right, so you're looking to bring some fresh perspective to Isaiah 9, 6 to 7 for your congregation, huh?
That's right.
Well, we've been doing some digging ourselves
We have.
into how other pastors are approaching this familiar passage, going beyond those, typical Sunday school interpretations. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
we found some really interesting stuff.
Some real gems, in
Yeah.
terms of how to bring it to life. What's really interesting is that a lot of the pastors we looked at are exploring this passage
Uh-huh.
through this lens of the dual advent.
Okay.
Right. So Jesus' first coming as that suffering servant, but
Right.
then his second coming as the reigning king.
That's really interesting because it makes you think about how understanding that contrast between the two advents
Right.
changes the way we approach this whole idea of peace,
Yeah.
both personally,
Mm-hmm.
but also, in the context of ministry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one sermon in particular that kind of hit on that was from St. Matthew Lutheran Church and School, Westland. And they used this really, I thought, helpful metaphor
Okay.
of God as a potter, shaping our lives even when we can't see the bigger picture.
Right.
And I thought they asked this really thought-provoking question, which was,
Okay.
how can you use that image of the potter and the clay
Mhm.
to actually make God's sovereignty
Yeah.
relatable to your congregation?
Because it can be such an abstract
It can be.
kind of concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good jumping off point because it gets you thinking, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you take these ancient
Yeah.
concepts, these ancient ideas, and make them actually connect
Make them real for people
to
today.
people today? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's Josh Sorensen,
Okay.
who took kind of a deep dive into this whole concept of shalom
Okay.
in Hebrew. And his argument was that it's not just, the absence of conflict.
Right.
It's really about this wholeness, this completeness.
Okay. That you find in Christ.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things like, okay,
Yeah.
that sounds great.
Right.
How do you actually preach on that?
Right. How do you make that a
Yeah.
Sunday morning message?
Yeah, how do you turn that abstract idea of shalom
Yeah.
into something that that's actionable for your congregation?
Yeah. And that's where I think it's really interesting. So Sorensen's challenge to his listeners,
Okay.
think about shalom as a verb,
Okay.
not just a noun.
Okay.
It's not something you passively receive.
Uh-huh.
It's something you actively cultivate
Okay.
in your relationships, in your communities, even in your own heart.
So it's about embodying peace,
Yeah.
not just talking about it.
Precisely. Yeah, exactly. And that kind of brings us to another theme that emerged from a lot of these sermons,
Okay.
this whole idea of hope in times of trouble.
Right.
And, it seems like pastors are really drawn to that imagery
Yeah.
of light shining in darkness,
Yeah.
especially right now.
Yeah. With everything that's going on in the world.
It feels particularly relevant right now.
It does.
Yeah.
And one pastor actually used the Christmas Truce,
Oh, wow.
World War I, as a sermon illustration,
Oh, that's good.
which I thought was really powerful.
Yeah.
You have these soldiers on opposing sides
Right.
in the middle of this brutal war,
Yeah.
and they come together on Christmas Eve to
Right, yeah.
celebrate.
It's hard to imagine a more powerful example of unexpected peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Breaking out in the most unlikely of places.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Yeah.
that little flicker of hope,
Mm-hmm.
that yearning for peace can still emerge.
It can. And the sermon from Colton Community Church really leaned into that idea. They call Isaiah 9, 6 to 7 a beacon of hope
Right.
in a world of turmoil.
Yeah. And they posed this, I thought, really challenging question to their listeners, which was, how can you weave this message of hope into your sermons, especially given current events?
Right.
It's easy to talk about peace.
In the abstract.
Yeah, in these abstract terms.
Right.
But how do you make it real for people who are struggling
Mm-hmm.
with real problems in their lives?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road. It's how do you connect those ancient truths
Yeah.
to the lived experiences of your people?
Yeah.
And that leads us to another kind of fascinating dimension of these sermons, which is how different pastors approached Jesus as the powerful peacemaker.
Okay, so they really kind of dug into
They did.
those names given to the Messiah in this passage.
Yeah.
Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
It's like his resume, right?
It is, yeah.
It's like, here are...
It's like a theological resume.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here are my qualifications
That's true.
for being the Messiah.
And each name offers
He does.
such a unique perspective
It does.
on his role in bringing peace.
It does. Like Grace Church, for example. They offered this, I thought, fascinating linguistic insight
Okay.
into the Hebrew meaning of everlasting Father.
Okay.
And they pointed out that it signifies Jesus as like the source of eternity.
So it's not just about like fatherhood in a traditional kind of paternal sense.
Right.
It's about being the origin, the wellspring of everlasting life.
It is, exactly.
Yeah.
So that shifts our understanding from just a purely paternal image to something much grander.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Jesus as the one who holds all of time and eternity in his hands.
That's powerful.
It is powerful, yeah.
Menlo Church kind of took a slightly different approach, suggesting that those names reveal both the strength and the gentleness of Jesus. Wonderful Counselor and Mighty God paint this picture of a divine warrior and planner. But then Everlasting Father and Prince of Peace kind of signify a ruler over time and over peace itself.
Yeah, it's like these names encompass the full spectrum of his power and authority. Right?
It really does.
The warrior who fights for us, the counselor who guides us, the father who loves us, the prince who establishes peace.
It definitely challenges that image of Jesus.
It does.
As just a passive, peaceful figure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it raises a really, I think, interesting question for your own sermons, which is, what does it mean to follow a king who embodies both?
Yeah.
Right? Both that strength and that peace.
Strength and peace.
How does that actually challenge our understanding of what it means to be a peacemaker ourselves?
That's a great question. And that's something that Mountain Vista Baptist Church really wrestled with.
Okay.
They challenged their listeners to be active peacemakers, reflecting Christ's kingdom in their own lives. They even went as far as to bring in Charles Spurgeon's perspective that peacemakers don't just avoid conflict, they actively work to end it.
Right.
Which is a challenge.
Yeah, it's a big challenge.
It is a challenge.
Especially for those of us in ministry.
Yeah, and I think they took it a step further by asking, how can churches embody peacemaking?
Okay.
Right? Like, how can your church, your community, actually be a force for peacemaking in your city, given its own unique challenges and opportunities?
It's a call to action.
It is.
It's about going beyond the theoretical and into the practical.
It is. And it makes you think about how you can actually challenge your people to move beyond just studying the words of Isaiah to actually living them out.
Right. To putting them into practice in their own lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of living it out, let's talk about some of the creative sermon illustrations
that pastors are using to bring this passage to life.
All right.
These aren't your typical, Sunday school visuals.
You're telling me, like, remember that Menlo Church sermon?
Oh, yeah?
It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh, come on.
So good. Yeah.
So good.
Drawing that parallel between George Bailey's despair and the peace that God promises, even when life feels overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's such a relatable movie too, right?
It is.
I mean, who hasn't felt like George at some point?
Yeah.
Like, does my life even matter? What am I even doing here?
Yeah, what's the point of all this?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then, of course, through divine intervention, George gets to see the impact his life actually made.
Right.
And so Menlo Church used that scene as a way to illustrate how God's peace is often revealed in ways we don't expect.
It's a good reminder, right?
Yeah.
Even when we can't see it, God is working.
Yeah.
Our lives do matter.
Yeah.
Even if we don't always understand how.
It's like that old saying.
Yeah.
We might not see the fruit of our labor.
Right.
But we're called to be faithful nonetheless.
Exactly. And speaking of unexpected connections, one pastor used the Christmas truce of World War I to illustrate the power of peace.
That's a good one.
Breaking out in the most unlikely of places.
Yeah, talk about a showstopper.
Right.
Right. Picture this. It's Christmas Eve, 1914.
Okay.
Trenches are lined with soldiers on opposing sides of this brutal war.
Yeah.
Suddenly, carols start drifting across no man's land.
Wow.
And soldiers cautiously emerge, share gifts, even play a game of soccer.
Come on.
All right.
That's crazy.
For a brief moment, humanity overshadows the horrors of war.
It gives you chills, right?
Yeah.
Just thinking about it.
It's a powerful image.
It shows that even in the midst of conflict, that spark of hope, that longing for peace can still exist.
It can, yeah. And that's the heart of Isaiah 9:6-7, isn't it?
It is.
God's peace isn't some far-off ideal.
Right.
It's a transformative power.
Right.
It can break through barriers, unite people, even enemies.
Yeah, I love how one pastor used Silent Night to challenge our assumptions
interesting.
about peace.
Okay.
Right. So you have this gentle melody, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And these lyrics, and it can lull us into kind of a sentimental view of peace.
Right.
Almost romanticized.
Yeah.
But then he contrasts that with, the very real chaos and suffering in our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he argued that true peace, the kind that Jesus offers, isn't about ignoring or escaping the darkness. It's about finding wholeness and strength in the midst of it.
Yeah, it's about facing the tough stuff head on. Knowing you're not alone, you have a Prince of Peace who walks with you through it all.
It's about finding that unshakable inner peace, even when the world around us is falling apart.
Yeah, all these illustrations, as diverse as they are, I think they all point to a single truth.
Okay.
God's peace is real, it's powerful, and it's available to us no matter what we face.
And they're a good reminder for us as preachers and teachers that sometimes the most effective way to communicate truth is through stories, images, examples that resonate with people's hearts and minds.
Yeah. Because when people can see those truths reflected in their own lives, their own experiences, that's when the message really comes alive.
It's about making the ancient relevant, making the profound accessible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do here.
Exactly.
And speaking of making the ancient relevant, a lot of these sermons tapped into the power of historical context to illuminate Isaiah 9:6-7.
Right. So one pastor, for example, explained the significance of royal childbirth announcements in the ancient Near East. It was a huge deal, loaded with symbolism and expectations.
So when Isaiah prophesies about the birth of a child who would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His original audience would have understood the weight of those titles.
They would have, They were longing for a Messiah, a king who would deliver them from their enemies and usher in this new era of peace. So by understanding that historical context, we can appreciate the revolutionary nature of Isaiah's prophecy and its fulfillment in Jesus.
It's like we're transported back in time, right?
It is.
We're standing alongside those who first heard those words.
Yeah.
And speaking of historical context, another sermon brought up the Zealots. Those Jewish revolutionaries who believed in violent resistance against Roman rule.
It's a fascinating contrast to Jesus' message of peace.
Yeah. It shows how radical his teachings were.
They were.
And still are.
And still are,
in a world where power and dominance were the norm. Jesus offers this completely different path.
Of humility.
Of
humility and love.
Which is still a countercultural message today.
It is, right?
In a world obsessed with power and control.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that brings us to some of the key theological insights that these sermons highlighted. Starting with God's sovereignty. Many pastors emphasized that God is in control. Even when things seem chaotic and unpredictable. One sermon used that classic metaphor. God as a potter shaping our lives.
Gently molding us into vessels fit for his purpose.
It's a comforting image. It reminds us that we're not just random products of chance. But we're intricately designed and crafted by a loving God.
A loving God,
And even when we feel like we're being stretched or pushed to our limits, it's all part of his plan. To make us stronger, more resilient, more beautiful.
More beautiful, And then there's the theme of God's faithfulness, which was closely tied to sovereignty in a lot of these sermons. They pointed out that Isaiah's prophecy was written centuries before Jesus' birth, yet it was fulfilled down to the smallest detail.
It's a powerful testament to God's unwavering commitment to his promises.
what he speaks, he brings to pass.
What he plans, he accomplishes.
It's an anchor for our faith, especially when we're navigating uncertainty and doubt.
Right. We can trust him.
Yeah.
Even when we don't understand what he's doing or why things are happening the way they are.
The way they are.
And that leads to another vital theme, hope.
Hope, yeah. Many pastors emphasize that Isaiah 9:6-7 is a beacon of hope for a world that desperately needs it.
It's like a light piercing through the darkness, reminding us that even in the midst of suffering and despair, God's promise of peace and redemption remains steadfast.
It does. And that hope isn't some vague wish or distant dream. It's grounded in the reality of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection.
He's already defeated sin and death.
He has,
He's already secured our victory.
And he's coming again to make all things new.
Wow.
That's a message that can truly transform lives.
It can, yeah.
It can give strength to the weary, comfort to the grieving, courage to the fearful. Yeah. It can inspire us to live differently, to love more boldly, to serve more sacrificially.
Yeah.
And it can give us the confidence to face whatever challenges come our way,
right,
knowing that we have a God who's with us always, even to the very end of the age.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into Isaiah 9:6-7, what are some key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind as they prepare their own sermons and studies? I think one of the things that really struck me about all these different approaches to Isaiah 9:6-7 was this emphasis on action.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the passage intellectually, right? It's about letting it transform how we live and how we lead our congregations.
Absolutely. And several of the sermons really drove that point home.
Yeah.
Like the one from Mountain Vista Baptist Church. They challenged their listeners to be active peacemakers, reflecting Christ's kingdom in their daily lives.
Yeah, and they didn't shy away from the hard questions.
They did.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Like they brought in Charles Spurgeon's perspective, who said that peacemakers don't just avoid conflict.
Right.
They actively work to end it.
Yeah, it's a powerful call to action.
It is.
Especially for those of us in ministry.
Yeah, it pushes us to go beyond platitudes and really wrestle with what it means to embody peace in a world that's often anything but peaceful.
Yeah, it's about actively seeking reconciliation, bridging divides, advocating for justice.
It's about putting that shalom we talked about earlier to practice, not just for ourselves, but for our communities and the world around us.
Exactly. And that raises a question that I think every pastor and Bible study leader needs to consider.
Yeah.
How can we as individuals and as communities of faith be agents of peace in a world that's so often marked by conflict and division?
It's a daunting question.
It is.
But these sermons offered some, I think, practical starting points.
Yeah, they do.
Things like, getting involved in local peace initiatives, advocating for social justice, or simply being a voice of reason and compassion in our everyday interactions.
And it's not about having all the answers or single-handedly solving the world's problems.
Right.
It's about taking those small, faithful steps, those acts of kindness and courage that can ripple outward and create a more peaceful world.
It's about being the change we want to see in the world, as they say.
It is.
And it starts with each of us.
It does. And that's a powerful message for pastors and Bible study leaders to share with their congregations. It's not enough to just study the words of Isaiah.
Right.
We have to let them shape our actions, our attitudes, our ministries.
It's about taking those ancient words and making them relevant, making them real. Making them a force for good in the here and now.
And I think that's what makes Isaiah 9:6-7 so enduringly powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just a beautiful prophecy. It's a call to action,
an
invitation to partner with God in bringing his kingdom of peace to earth.
So as you prepare your next sermon or Bible study on this passage, remember that it's not just about imparting knowledge, it's about inspiring transformation.
What is,
Challenge your listeners to think deeply, to connect personally, and to act boldly.
Encourage them to see themselves as peacemakers, as agents of reconciliation, as bearers of that shalom that can heal and restore our broken world.
And who knows, right?
Yeah.
maybe their faithful obedience, will spark a chain reaction of peace and hope.
Right.
That will spread far beyond their own communities.
Now, that's a legacy worth striving for.
It is.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
yeah,
I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
What if we approached every aspect of our lives, every relationship, every challenge, with that same commitment to peacemaking that we find in Isaiah 9:6-7?
Yeah.
What kind of world could we create?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
And one that I hope will stay with you long after this episode ends.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Isaiah 9:6-7.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.